But I know enough to know that I need to listen to people that know more than me. So I started trying to make these portraits. There's only one portrait in the book, but it's the very last portrait in the book. But as I was photographing Deacon Mance, I come in, I'm thinking about what these people are telling me, and he's sitting in his favorite seat, and there's a window, there's a door beside him. So it's this nice side light, the ingredients are there. So I'm trying to make some portraits, and then, and just joking with me, Deacon Mance takes his handkerchief and throws it up. I mean, this moment happened so fast, y'all. I mean, it happened so fast, I didn't even know if it was in focus. It wasn't until I got home and started going through my images that I realized it was in focus. But my mentor, a gentleman by the name of Chuck Dye, had for like 20 years been trying to talk to me about symbolism and metaphor in my work. And it's something I desired to do, but I struggled to do it. And as I looked at this photo, I realized that the veil was a metaphor of how Black communities have been in these mountains for hundreds of years. Many, many contributions. I mean, y'all know, many of the buildings that were built, many of the mines that were mined, it's deep, right? We can have a whole discussion on the contributions of African Americans in Appalachia. So after I made this photo, I started kind of looking for that. So the veil kind of became this symbol. So what I want to do real quick before I invite Maya up and Fatima to read a poem is I just want to share some things with you that you wouldn't know by reading the book. So the first thing is, as you go through, like you knew that something was going to happen. Give me one quick second, y'all. All right, I just want to show you Deacon Mance's eyes. Deacon Mance was 103 years old when I photographed him. Still living alone, all of his faculties, beautiful man. Unfortunately, he's passed away, as have probably about 20 people in that book have passed away. About every month or so, I get a call that someone else has passed away. But that's symbolism that you may see here and there going through a veil. Also, I decided to start obscuring people's faces. When you see photos where someone's face is obscured, that person is meant to be an archetype. That person is meant to symbolize all the stories that we will never know, all the communities that we will never know. So as you go through the book and you're looking at that, it's something to pay attention to. This is right here in Weaverville in the Hillside community. This is in Texana. This is at the Rock Springs camp meeting. This is Mark Pickens, one of the last Black hunters in Western North Carolina. This is William Tank Coward in Silva, North Carolina. This is the beautiful Mr. Jack Pierce, who just passed away about 6 days ago. Trying to incorporate the land into this book, like all of us live in the mountains, so we know what it's like here. But I really wanted it to be to where someone that came and looked at this book that had never spent time in Appalachia, by the time they were done with the book, they would have an idea of what the landscape is and what it feels like to be here. And then also have that vibe of what the Black experience in the mountains is like. And of course, this book, like any book, is just a glimpse. It's just a glimpse. But as you're going through the book, another thing you wouldn't realize, but you would see, is that I incorporated these landscape photos, and they act as chapter breaks. There's no official chapter breaks, but like this photo I made about 25 years ago, camping and hiking over in Pisgah National Forest over near Table Rock and Lindell Gorge. So as you see these landscape photos, just recognize that that's letting you know that something new is about to happen. That's a Shining Rock Wilderness. This is over near Lake Santilla. This is Jonesboro, Tennessee. So one more story, and then we will let the ladies talk. So when I began this project in 2016, Marie took me to this church, Mount Zion AME Church in Cullowhee, North Carolina, which has a rich history and a sad history. This church was actually at one time on the grounds of Western Carolina University. And I have to make sure I don't curse up here. But But through a series of events, these folks were pushed. They pretty much, the university paid them so much money and made them move their church and all of their graves. It's some bullshit. But that is where this project began. Marie talked to the pastor, told him what we were doing, asked me if I could come by and make some photos. Unfortunately, like so many other churches, this church is no longer even has services anymore. But this is the original congregation. This photo was taken in the early 1900s. When I showed up to the church, there was only one person attending the Bible study, and there was the deacon. And that was kind of sad, right? Just one person at the Bible study. The one person at the Bible study, her sister was May Louise Allen, who is the matriarch of that church. And she told me, "You've got to meet my sister." But the only time that she would see her sister was at church. Well, I'm sitting there waiting, and by the time the service was about to start, I don't know, it was about a dozen people there or so. This was Easter Sunday, 2016. And I look out the window and I see this beautiful woman in this red dress, and I think, oh, that must be May Louise. And I run around to the back door, and this is what I see. That's not what I see. This is what I see. And I see the deacon and Reverend Grant bringing Miss May Louise in. And they bring Miss May Louise in, and she walks over, and her sister gives her a kiss on the forehead. And it's one of those times where I didn't know if the photos were going to make the cut or not, but it's just this very special moment, right? So here I am. I've been looking for these communities. I finally have found one community. I found this beautiful woman. She still lived on her family's land. Her family had owned the entire mountainside for more than 100 years. There's this rich history and culture there. I asked Miss May Louise, can I come back in about a month or so and spend some time with her? And she says yes. And it was beautiful. And she was, you know how sometimes you meet folks, they just make you feel like you're family. And she was calling me honey. And like, I didn't know my grandparents because like, she said in the intro, you know, my dad is Black, my mom is white, and there was a lot of racial tension in our family. I never knew my grandparents. And so I just felt the love. I went back to Georgia. I was so excited about coming back. And I think it was like 19 days later, I got a call that Miss May Louise had passed away. And it hit me hard, you know, because I didn't know about the history and culture in the mountains. And then I was finding out, and then I quickly found out that a lot of these communities are disappearing. And that's what everyone told me, man, you should have been here 50 years ago. And it's like, well, I can't go back in time. And I'm a documentary photographer, so I'm not setting things up or conceptualizing things. But I just know, and we all know, like today is a day in history. And today is tomorrow's history. And so that is how this project began. And now I would like to invite Fatima to come read one of Kelly's poems. Yeah, Kelly, I mean, not Kelly, Fatima, if you wouldn't mind. And this is a poem, you know, Kelly Elaine, this book is not a part of they're selling it at the bookstore at the African American Smithsonian, but we're not affiliated with them. I want to make that clear. But Kelly Elaine does lead the oral history program at that Smithsonian. And her poems, when y'all read these poems, a lot of them are coming from oral histories that she did more than 30 years ago. A lot from Madison County and Buncombe County. So I'll pass it on to Fatima.
This is entitled Walking with Aunt Lou. She takes my hand this wintry mountain morning and we walk. I don't know how far we're going because I don't know how far we've been. So I listen. She say, I'm not just talking. This is soul talk, girl. And I think, I must write this down. This the way her story travels the 60-some years between our age, like so many monarch butterflies. It rains down upon my bowed head like Sunday sounds at a small Baptist church where the congregation is the choir. And still, the sun hangs in the east, but the planets, they get a Holy Ghost and dance into new constellations, taking us miles beyond the distance marked by our footprints on this sacred ground. Amen.
So Dr. Meister Dam, I met her in 21 when she was working on a Black History program at the Mars Hill Rosenwald School. And she asked me to do some photography for them. And it was through Maya that I met. Actually, I met Maya originally in Jonesboro, Tennessee on the Juneteenth event. Later, she reached out to me about volunteering to do some photography. And then she also introduced me to Kelly Elaine Navies and introduced me to Fatima. And so, Maya, if you wouldn't mind coming up, please. Sure. Yeah. I think whatever you like.
Good evening, everybody. I've learned that I take my readers with me now. It's really nice to be here. Thank you for reading that. And like Chris said, this feels special because we did all meet because of a shared interest and commitment to Black history and preserving some of these stories. So including Kelly Elaine. So to have this book as a representation of this years-long collaboration feels really important. And I think it's also important to mention a bit about my own involvement in this. And Chris briefly mentioned that I was working on a project at the Mars Hill Anderson Rosenwald School. That's when I first met Fatima Shabazz and Omar McLean in 2018 through an educational organization I work for called PAGE. So we were working to learn about the preservation of that school building, an old Rosenwald school, a segregated school for Black children in Madison County. And I mentioned that in part, that's another book that we want to give a shout out to, that you, if you're interested in this history, you can learn a lot more about the more local history. The Friends of the Rosenwald School, of which both Mr. McLean and Ms. Shabazz were part, and of which I joined in 2020, helped for at least 13 years to work on that building and to preserve the history. And so that's that's the project that got us together. And also, if I had had a little bit more time, I would have loved to have written something about that school, because that's an important story too. You'll not learn about that history through the essays, but there is a photograph that I think you'll see later, and a poem that was inspired by that school, written by Kelly Elaine. So you'll hear a little bit more about that. But as a historian, I've been studying American history and African American history for about 25 years now. And I've lived in this area for 13 or so, and it's really important to me to study the place that I live, even if I'm not a native of that place. It is my adopted home. So that's part of what drew me to this project. Where was I going with that? But my contributions to this book are in some ways a reflection of Chris's journey through this story. I came along at the tail end of the project. He'd been working, meeting people and connecting with people for over 6 years. And he had a real vision about the histories that were most important to preserve in this book. And so I drew inspiration from him. And he mentioned this, but I was able to meet a number of folks who were represented in the book and to learn about the history through those communities. So in a way, historians, if we're lucky, we can access those primary sources, just talk to people who live that experience. And I was able to do that in each of the essays, each of the 3 states that we visited. But I also drew so heavily upon oral history collections, recollections like Keisha Blunt, who shared her family story, stories like from both Mr. McLean and Fatima Shabazz, who shared their families' stories. And so in a way, I pulled these together. And if you read the essays, I encourage you to look at the footnotes if you're really interested in history, because these are such little glimpses. You know, there's one essay from each state represented in the book, but there's so many more that could have been told, and so many more that other people are actively working to tell by collecting oral histories, preserving those stories. So that feels important to me to mention. And I need a drink of water. But I am going to share something from a story that is set in East Tennessee in Bays Mountain. And this photograph really piqued my interest. And this story begins with a man named Jerome Pierce, who was enslaved in Bays Mountain by Dr. Pierce. This photograph here is Jerome Pierce and his wife Lavinia Pierce in their older years in front of a home that they built together and lived in Bays Mountain for a long time. You could go back, yeah. So a gentleman named Jack Pierce is really the reason that this historical essay exists in this book, because of his generosity in sharing his family story and his effort to preserve these stories, in part through celebrating them through photography. In his living room, this photograph hung on the wall, as did a photograph of a print of Black soldiers during the Civil War fighting with the cavalry. And Jerome Pierce, Jack Pierce's grandfather, the man who had been enslaved on Bays Mountain, he had an opportunity to fight with the Union Army, where he learned how to work with livestock. And it was that experience fighting with the cavalry that led him to learn more about working with animals. And after the war, after he had secured his freedom, he found a way to earn a living working with livestock. And so that experience, which there's a lot of missing details here, a lot of things that we don't know, which is always one of the hard things about history, but one of the reasons why oral histories are so important. But what we do know is that after he earned his freedom, he was able to purchase land. He owned 80 acres of land on Bays Mountain and used his skills with livestock to purchase animals of his own. And what you see here is Jerome Pierce in the front with two of his sons, Albert and Patton. And all the materials you see, the mules, the wagons, and the timber were their own. And so that experience helped him to secure some financial security and stability for his family. He taught that skill to his sons. His son, so this would be Albert Pierce, Jack's father, and Lena Pierce, his mother. His son took those skills that he learned from his father and expounded on them. So he also worked with horses. He made good money shoeing horses for the pet milk company, for example. And so whereas many people in that area were lucky if they earned $1 a day, Albert Pierce was able to earn 50 cents a shoe on each horse. So $2 per horse. And what happened is that he was able to build a successful business and really earn some economic freedom for himself and his family. And Jack Pierce told us a story about growing up there in Bays Mountain and how in that community, which was a mixed race community, that they had such, they were considered well off in that family, in that community. And he told us that in their family, they were hiring white folks to do their laundry and to do some of their domestic chores. And that really stands out. Not that it's representative of all Black folks in East Tennessee. It's not, but it does represent the diverse experiences that Black folks could have. It's not a story that's typically told. And it's important, and this passing down of these skills over generations and really emphasizing economic security and teaching those skills to their children as well. And another interesting thing from this, in this essay about East Tennessee, I don't know if there's maybe a picture of Jack Pierce or Montreal Brown. Might be nice to show. This photograph is that house that you saw in the last picture that his grandfather had built. Yeah. And at the time that was taken, his family still owned that land and that home, and they were renting to some white folks. So still kind of sharing resources across the color line there. But the other point I wanted to mention, something that comes through in the essay that's really interesting, has to do with the third generation. So Jack Pierce, and this photo is so sweet. I'll let Chris speak to that. But Jack Pierce and his cousin Montreal Brown, who's known as Bounce, they were part of the generation where a lot of folks moved out, and this is true in many rural places. People leaving for jobs, and of course accelerated for Black folks who had fewer opportunities. But these two cousins decided to stay. And they shared experiences about how different the experience of Jim Crow was for them based on where they lived. And this is another thing that I had never heard people share in the stories I had learned about this history. But on Bays Mountain, which was a rural community, Jack Pierce explained that they really didn't experience racial, there was no segregation there, and there was a lot of amicable, helpful relations between white and Black neighbors. When he went to high school in Kingsport a few years later, totally different story. And so that was when he first experienced segregated public accommodations and the hostility that came with that. And Bounce, Mr. Montreal Brown here, he grew up in Jonesboro. And Jonesboro has this fascinating history that you can learn a little bit more about in this book. But he lived in Jonesboro, which was the home of the first abolitionist paper in 1820. Happened to be started by a white Quaker slaveholder. So complicated story. So he grew up in Jonesboro, and he said that where he lived, it was an interracial neighborhood, and he never experienced any, of the white or colored water fountains and that kind of segregation. He didn't experience it there. But 6 miles away in Johnson City, Tennessee, totally different story. So that really stands out as an example of a complicated histories, and one that you wouldn't necessarily know unless you're talking to people and learning about those firsthand experiences. So those are some of the things that stand out to me about what I learned in East Tennessee, and I'll pass the mic back to Chris now.
And I'll speak for just a second. While I'm doing that, Fatima, would you mind coming up to prepare for the next point? So, I went to East Tennessee on Christmas Eve in 2020. Y'all remember that thing? It was called like Corona or COVID or something like that. And I had, every time the reason why this project went from one state to another state is because I would meet people and they'd say, hey, I've got family on the other side of the mountain. You need to go over there. And then I would go over there and I would just bounce around. And I kept hearing about East Tennessee. And so I went there one Christmas Eve, and it was a cold, rainy day. And I walked around and I met this pastor. He told me about Jack Pierce and took me to Jack Pierce's house. And Mr. Pierce was 93 years old at the time. And then I guess really what I'm getting at is that Mr. Pierce passed away 7 days ago, y'all. This man's grandfather had been enslaved. I mean, think about that. Think about your grandparents. And I know that we're all open-minded people here, but you know, when we're around older Black folks, man, we really need to show them some respect, right? Because you don't know what somebody's been through. It's crazy, crazy. I mean, I couldn't believe that. Mr. Pierce told me that. And anyhow, his wife passed away late last year. Mr. Pierce just passed away, but he was just a beautiful man. I just want to honor him for that second, for that moment. And Fatima is going to read another poem for us, Praise Song for the Lilies, which Kelly Elaine was inspired by this photo that had taken of one of her cousins over in the hillside community in Weaverville. Do y'all know what a griot is? Do you? Can someone tell me out loud? Yeah, an African storyteller. I didn't know what it meant until I read this poem. I was like, oh, I like that. What does that mean? So anyhow. Is that mic on for someone?
Praise song for lilies. On this porch, I can see far back as I remember, and as far into the future as I believe. Yesterday, he sang spirituals with echoes of blues. Tomorrow, witness the glory of lilies blooming in my yard. The trees are our elders, silent grout, carrying our stories. Here's one. When I was 5, Grandma stood me on the stool, taught me how to cook. We were alone and had to eat. I had to do what I could, but she couldn't do as much anymore. It was a long winter and I worked hard, washed clothes by hand, and gathered eggs in the winter until my fingers almost froze. But each fall, I woke up at dawn, eager to take that long bus ride into town to go to that colored high school. I didn't care about the color only signs. My mind fertile like dark earth before planting season. Our teachers, the prophets, bringing the word. In art class, I studied mangoes, sunflowers from a book with torn pages passed down from the white high school. Still, I yearn to run through fields of gold. Now, the hateful signs are gone, and my grandchildren can go anywhere they choose. The story of their lives should make a new world. Tomorrow, there's more work to be done. But now, I sit on the porch, close my eyes, and forget about my aching bones. As the sky grows dark, light fading over the hills, I still see lilies everywhere. Their scent carrying songs of praise. Hallelujah.
This was Jack Pierce's grandfather on his mother's side. This picture was hanging on the wall in his house. It's an old tin type. It was just so beautiful. A lot of the historical photos you see in the book were never seen before in the public. I collected them from different folks. And this was Bounce's father, who lived in a 12-foot by 12-foot cabin on Bays Mountain. And I just thought, man, what an attractive man, you know, so well dressed. We are about to run out of time. We wanted to tell you all the stories about the camp meeting, and we want to tell you stories about Texana, but well, we got about 5 more minutes for questions. So I'm gonna tell you all about the camp meeting real quick. Would you like to say something about the camp meeting? Okay. So Maya wrote an essay about this, and when you read in the book, you know, obviously she, you know, did a better job than I may do right now, but real quick. This is an old arbor at a camp meeting. Who's ever been to an old-timey camp meeting? All right, beautiful, beautiful. This camp meeting is called the Rock Springs Camp Meeting. It's in Mossy Creek, Georgia, in White County, Georgia. It was formed around 1886. This structure was built. This is one of the descendants, one of the ancestors, I mean. This structure was built in 1886 by formerly enslaved people, and it still stands to this day. The fact that it still stands to this day is a testament to their craftsmanship. These weren't trained architects, but they sure knew how to build something. And if you look at the top of those logs up there, you can actually see the axe marks, which is, I've gone up there and camped out multiple times and stayed. It used to be that people would come for a week and they would bring their cows and their livestock with them. Now it's a weekend thing. And some people come for the religious aspect of it, and they bring different preachers in and different singers. But some people just come for the fellowship. I've sat around and drank a little bit of moonshine with folks and ate good food and then gone and listened to the preacher preach. And it's just it's a beautiful thing. This used to be a whole community called Leo, and Black folks used to own all the land around it. Unfortunately, no African Americans live there anymore. And folks have encroached on this land. People have that's not curse. Some body came and carved KKK in the podium. Some extremely intelligent people decided that it was a good place to gut their deers out. Their deer, I mean, under this sacred place. And, you know, they would have people drive by and hooting and hollering and flying their little rebel flags and all that stuff. But these people persevered. They built these little tents that if you've been to a camp meeting, you know what I'm talking about. They're these little structures. They're not intended to live in permanently. And it's very important to me that y'all know that when you see some of these photographs, these are not these people's homes. Like this is Miss Phyllis Burt going to the Sunday service, but this is not the home she lives in. This is a home that was just supposed to be used for this one weekend out of the year. Same with this photo here of Chandler. This was his first year at the camp meeting after his mother had passed away. But I heard stories about that whole mountainside over there having all types of different trees, and folks would hunt and sustain themselves. And it was a beautiful community. They had a store, a school, a church, and now none of that remains. And one thing I learned that I thought was so cool, and I wonder if any of y'all know that. This is in Georgia. So if you've been to Georgia, you know about that red clay, and you don't want to get it on your clothes. But did y'all know what else people use sawdust for? They use it to repel the mosquitoes. So I got a whole bunch of sawdust. I'm ready to throw it all over myself when summer comes around because I did not know that is better than off. This is from a memorial service, and several people in this photograph have passed away, unfortunately. There's little details when you look at these photos. For example, I would not have chosen this photo if that gentleman wasn't wearing a wedding ring. That wedding ring, you know, symbolizes a lot of things, right? Fidelity, perseverance, compromise, if you've ever been married. This is Miss Gloria and her husband, Snap. Snap passed away a few years ago. There's a series when y'all look at the book, the book kind of ascends like any story does and kind of climaxes, and then it descends. And on the descent, I did this series of photos that's like one after the other, like this moment after this. And I kind of felt like it gave the book a little bit of motion before it kind of closes out. But it's just a place where family comes together. And if y'all ever want to experience a camp meeting, it's Labor Day weekend. And we're about to go into the Q&A. But there's one thing I have to share with y'all. And it is about, actually, let me just show y'all these photos real quick. It's hard for photos to capture what it feels like to be someplace. I would stay there after everyone left and just sit under that arbor and just feel the place. And I have all kinds of recordings. I recorded everything, all of the music. So I have all of the sounds, and I hope to do a show one day that incorporates all of that. This is Henrietta Sutton. She was telling me how as a kid, they would always pick muscadines, you know, and then it's hard, you know, you would think that this is a photo where the woman just held her hand there. It's like, no, she was like moving her hand the whole time. And that particular camera I was using was a manual focus camera. So it's a very simple photo. And it doesn't matter how hard it is to make a photo, that doesn't make it good. But this was a challenging photo to make, y'all. This is Mr. Cecil Dorsey, and I met Mr. Cecil at camp meeting. And let's tell you another real quick story. And this is just something else that you don't know what people have been through. Mr. Cecil Dorsey grew up in White County, grew up going to that camp meeting. His ancestors were some of the founding members. And he told me how he was buying some land from this white gentleman. And every time he got paid, about every 2 weeks, he gave that man so much money. And after a few years, I think he said it was around 3 years, he was paid in full. And he went to the man and wanted the deed to that land. And the man told him, I don't have the deed. I don't own that land. I'm just going to rob from you. So Mr. Cecil let his temper get the best of him. He pulled out his knife and he cut that man. Rightfully so, if you ask me. Well, that man showed up at Mr. Cecil's house that night with his KKK friends in full regalia. This is back in the 60s. And Mr. Cecil had his kids in the house, and he told them to, I don't remember how many children he had. I remember him talking about his daughter. And he told them to go hide. And he went out on that front porch with his shotgun. And this is crazy, y'all, but I've heard this story in different places and similar things. But he called every man by name because he could recognize the men by the shoes they were wearing. And he pretty much told them, y'all can come up here if you want to, but I'm going to take some of you with me. And one by one, each man left. And this is a classic example that Mr. Cecil could have been lynched that day if he wasn't going to go out there and protect himself. And one of the most beautiful things about working on this project, y'all, is being able to go back to the communities and take the book to the people. And I surprised Mr. Cecil. He's in assisted living. When I made this photo, this is on his front porch when he was living alone. This is the only portrait in the book, by the way. And man, I gave Mr. Cecil that book, and he walked around that nursing home, and it was predominantly white folks there. And he was, you know, so proud. And I couldn't help but think that some of those folks that were there were possibly related to some of those folks that would have possibly killed Mr. Cecil that day. And it was just a beautiful thing. And if y'all could hear Mr. Cecil sing, the man had a voice on him. He still does. But he told me, he said, Chris, like, thank you. He said, I've only got a few more years left to live. He said, but people will know about me through this book, you know. And that's more important than really anything from this project. One thing, please buy the book or at least look at it. There's a community in there called Texana. I don't have time to tell you about the history of it. My lovely friend Keisha, her family is from there. But I'm saying all that to say, if y'all want to go to an awesome Juneteenth event, I know they do something here, but if y'all want to go to something really cool, go to Texana because it's awesome. Last year, they had a reggae band, they had a country band, they had a car show. There's a cool vibe. It's white folks and black folks. And once you read about the history of Texana, it'll make you want to go even more. So just wanted to give a little shout out to that. And now we will open it up for a Q&A. And of course, Maya and Fatima are available for questions as well. I don't know if we have any questions from the people streaming, but do we have any questions from y'all? Yes, sir.
I'd just like to share a couple of books that are local. Actually, 3 of them. One is the Rosenwald School in Brevard.
Okay.
It's a book like Mars Hill. It's not as good as Mars Hill, believe me. However, and the other 2 are by a woman named Linda Brown, a white woman who both has a book. And they're both in Kenilworth. One is about the graveyards, and the other are both African American, the graveyard and the African American community in Kenilworth, and it took her 10 years to do that. So the book is available through the old Buncombe County Geological Society up near the old Square D plant. And they also have a lot of black genealogy up there, interestingly enough. So just wanted to share those other resources.
Thank you. That Rosenwald School's in Brevard?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Where is Texana?
Texana is outside of Murphy, North Carolina. Far, far western North Carolina, Cherokee County. Yes, sir.
Well, I was just thinking about other stories as you were speaking, and a song recently sung by a woman named Rhiannon Giddens.
Yeah.
About the Swananoa Tunnel.
Rihanna's awesome.
She's incredible, but I think it was an older song that she re-sung, I guess, but the old spiritual was about the men that worked on the railroad and built the tunnel.
Oh, wow.
Just another.
I have to check that out. Yeah, I think she was with the Carolina Chocolate Drops for a while. And yeah.
She's pretty cool.
Yeah, she's awesome. I think she's from Tennessee.
Convicts.
Yes, sir.
So what's next?
You know, it's funny. Everyone keeps asking me that. I have begun starting to photograph for a second volume. When I started on this project, it was on my own dime. So I slept in my car, slept in people's houses, I camped out, ate crackers and sardines and all that. I would like to do this one a little differently. So I'm trying, yeah, brother. So I'm trying to get some grants and some funding, but I really think if I can get this book in front of the right people and say, hey, I want to continue this and do a second volume. I do have another book I'm hoping to self-publish by the end of the year called Fear, Death, and the Other Side. If you go to my website, if you Google my name, you can find my website. It's not documentary. It's very freeing for me. It's a fine art project, and it's just all about the notion that we're all going to die one day, and we have different ideas of what might happen, but we don't know until we finally make it. And so it's just a lot of metaphor and symbolism, and it's beautiful for me because I don't have to. It takes so long to build trust to make these types of photographs. Making the photographs is the easy part, really. It's building the trust and having the access and being there, you know. So those are two things. But yeah, I started photographing in Liberia, South Carolina. And I'm hoping now that I live in Madison County, it's a lot easier for me to get around. But yeah, I'll be photographing, you know, who knows? Hopefully that one won't take 8 years, you know?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Another South Carolina photographer named Constantine Manos.
Yeah, he just passed away.
Yeah, he just died. And when he turned 85, he decided that he wanted his pictures to be poetry.
Oh, beautiful.
And none of them have been published yet.
Oh. I'm sure they will be because he's a Magnum guy and people will be hungry for that. 100%.
Anyway, it connects to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember hearing him speak one time. He's a great photographer. Yes.
What surprised you the most about the project?
You know what's interesting? So, you know, growing up biracial, I experienced some racist type stuff, like the KKK burned a cross in our front yard when I was a kid, and people would call me half-breed and all these other things, and call my mom names. And there were times where me and my brother would fight white people and black people. So I grew to hate the rebel flag, right? And all those monuments. I remember spitting on them when I was a kid. And then as I got older, I started to understand, well, you know, maybe it is heritage and not hate for some folks, you know, because I don't know, if my great-grandfather had fought in the war to protect his land, then, you know, I can understand that. Anyhow, I was in Texana one time with my brother, who looks like a black man, who's scared to move to the mountains. He won't do it. He lives in DC. Anyhow, I was taking him to Texana, and I wanted to go introduce him to Mark Pickens, who's become a good friend of mine. I was like, but I got to introduce you to this dude. That's a friend of mine. He's a hunter. I've been bear hunting with him, blah, blah, blah. And as we're driving into Texana, this person has a rebel flag covering up their car. And Bernard says, yeah, man, you see that bullshit right there? They're trying to intimidate people. And I said, well, man, I don't know. I don't know that's what that dude's doing. I don't know him. I can't judge him. Like, you know, he's like, no, he's trying, you know, and my brother, like, if that left up to my brother, he'd go over there and like burn it, you know, and then we'd go to jail and it'd be a big problem, probably get killed. And so then I talked to my buddy Mark. And I said, yo, Mark, what's up with that rebel flag? Is that dude trying to intimidate people? And I'm not trying to be offensive to anybody. But Mark says, man, Chris, I got friends that fly that rebel flag. And if I went to them and asked them for $100, asked them for $50, they'd give me $100. And he said, but I could ask some people in my own community for $50 and they might laugh at me. And he said, so don't judge everybody that has a rebel flag as being a straight up racist. I told my brother that, and my brother's like, yeah, whatever. And I still struggle with that. But it opened my eyes a little bit to culture and a different side of the coin and how we can judge each other. And another thing that surprised me, one of the big questions I had to ask myself working on this project, because I was living in Atlanta at the time, and I got plenty of Black friends and Black family members, and I was like, man, how is Black culture in the mountains different than Black culture in other places? And that was a big question to ask myself. And you could ask yourself the same question about Appalachian folks, born and raised. What was the difference in an Appalachian person and a white person from South Carolina or any other place? And so I was really trying to figure that out. And let me see. One of the things when I would go to church services, I would hear the preachers and the clergymen and clergywomen, they would talk about things like Patsy Cline or about the bears and just the livestock and all of these different things. And this is a picture I made early on, and I almost didn't put it in the book because I thought it was kind of cliche, because you've kind of seen this type of photo before. But this is a William Tank Coward that lives in Sylvan, North Carolina. And his favorite musician growing up was Merle Haggard. I showed this photo to some of my friends, Black friends in Atlanta, and they were like, "Who's Merle Haggard?" And so then I really have to ask myself, like, what is culture? Right? It's the food we eat, it's the music we listen to, it's how we celebrate, how we mourn, all these different things. But one thing that I learned is that the Black folks in Appalachia are just as much Appalachian as they are African American. And so yeah, those are some things that stand out to me. Yes, sir.
Looking at you, listening to you and everything, one of the things is I've lived in Asheville for 42 years. So I'm probably just my last year will be in Asheville. But one of the things I think I'm going to do is go to Murphy. Highway 64. Go from Murphy to Matthew.
Oh.
All the Black folks and everything that lives along there, because it's sort of and it goes to Greensboro, it goes through Bat Cave and all this stuff. I did it the opposite way about 8 years ago. I went from Matthew to Murphy. And I got to Murphy, it was dark.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to have been in Blairsville or Hiawassee or some of those other places.
I hear about Blairsville. Don't be in Blairsville.
You don't want to be in Blairsville. I mean, I think now you'd probably be all right, but back in the day, you sure enough didn't want to be there.
So maybe I'll take on that project. Let's go back home. And it's almost reversing it and going back home. There's a lot of Black communities all along.
Yeah.
Highway 64.